Shiloh had worked at the same office for years, and she had begun developing casual relationships with the people that she passed in the halls. The conversations were always brief, but they offered a small level of comfort to her that added to her overall desire to stay at the otherwise monotonous job. Of the people that she spoke to the most, she was most friendly towards the members of the custodial staff, who she thought to be the most underpaid and the hardest workers. For them, she was overly nice and extremely sympathetic. When Tomas was assigned to the area that she worked at, she thought nothing of it at first. He was an older, quiet man that simply smiled at her when he grabbed the trash from her cubicle, and then he would leave without saying a word. Eventually, the man began speaking to her, and Shiloh was delighted. They would chat primarily about simple things: the weather, the day of the week in relation to the weekend, and general how do you do's. The conversations were short, but Shiloh could sense that he wanted to share more with her. She began opening up the conversation a bit more in order to encourage the conversation, and she would make a point to ask him about his interests, be it in movies, books, and shows, and about what he did over the weekend. Tomas never really gave her an answer. He would keep it short and would instead change the subject of the conversation to her, urging her to say more about herself and to allow him to get to know more about her. She didn't think much about it at first and assumed that he just did not like talking about himself to her, which was fine and understandable. But as weeks went by, the questions started to make her feel uneasy. Instead of asking her about television or about movies, or anything else simple for that matter, he began asking her very probing and personal questions about her relationships, who she lived with, and if she ever felt unsafe at night. Shiloh was an overly honest person, and she told him that she was single, that she lived alone, and that she lived in a relatively safe neighborhood where she didn't really feel nervous at home alone. He then asked her where she lived, and she gave him an answer, but she couldn't help but to feel a bit uneasy giving him this information. He began lingering in her office for longer periods of time, and he refused to leave, even when she told him that she needed to get back to work. A male employee began to even notice how strange his behavior was, and began coming to her cubicle intentionally each time that Tomas would enter the room. Andrew, her coworker, stayed in her cubicle for as long as Tomas stayed in the area. One time he even stayed as long as an hour before Tomas finally left. They weren't sure if Tomas understood the hint being presented to him, and Shiloh began to feel a sense of paranoia and unease over the entire situation. She eventually began leaving the cubicle to go to the restroom, or to get coffee around the time that Tomas would typically come around to pick up trash. Noticing this behavior, Tomas changed the time of day that he came by, and he did it with such sporadicness that it was hard for Shiloh to guarantee that she would miss him. On Valentine's Day, she came in to work to find a note scribbled on her whiteboard that read, "You will be mine, Valentine." There was no signature, but she knew it was him. She confronted him about it, but he refused to state that he had written it. A few weeks later, when she went on vacation, he texted her to see why she had left him. He asked her questions about who drove her to the airport because he knew that she didn't drive herself since the car was still in the driveway. When she didn't respond, he threatened to break into her house using her spare key that she kept hidden in her garden. Shiloh had never given him this information, and she began to freak out. She texted him back to state that he needed to leave her alone and that she'd report him to the police if her camera saw him break in. He didn't respond for a while, and just when she was starting to feel at ease, her coworker Andrew, now her boyfriend, who had driven her to the airport, called her over a text message that he had received from Tomas. It was a photo of him lying in her bed masturbating. In the caption he wrote said, "You may get to drive her to the airport, but I'm the one in her bed." How he knew that Shiloh did not have security cameras and where she kept her key, she never found out. Andrew had called the police to report a breaking and entering, but there was no trace left behind. Shiloh didn't know what to do. She tried to report the incident to Tomas's boss, but he said that although he felt for her, Tomas was no longer his responsibility, as he had not shown up for work and that he had been fired accordingly. Andrew helped her set up cameras, and she never saw Tomas again. But the thought of him in her bed stuck with her until she eventually had to move states. It's funny. I thought that I would feel a sense of shame about what we had done that night. But the more that time passes between now and then, the less remorse I feel. I feel so separated from the events that it almost feels as if my actions were merely part of a dream, a misadventure brought to life through an active, shared tale and through the power of collective imagination. It might be incredibly arrogant of me to state this, but as terrible as the event was for all of us and for my part in it, I found it to be almost inconsequential to my day-to-day life. Back when this all happened, my friends and I were all bored, overly self-important teenagers who thought ourselves to be better than most people, and that those in our immediate surroundings were scummy, boring, unintelligent underlings for us to screw with however we pleased. Tormenting those that were not a part of our group was our main source of entertainment, as we found all other tasks to be tedious. We didn't like to go to the bowling alley. We found movies to be boring, and video games were only entertaining for us for so long before we felt as if we needed to do something more intellectually stimulating. To entertain ourselves, we kept a collection of tertiary friends who we would invite over on occasion. We would act as if we liked them. We would listen to them talk and laugh at their jokes, all while secretly making fun of them in our own hidden language. We would laugh about them as soon as they were gone, and we would marvel at our ability to make these people that we found to be lesser than us think that they were actually our friends. When we got bored of retelling the tales from the last occurrence, we would invite them over and repeat the process. Savannah was one of these friends, and although we treated her the same as the others, we found her in particular to be delightfully strange. Savannah was convinced that there were guiding spirits in the world, and she dabbled in witchcraft with the curiosity of an innocent child. What others would find as grotesque and disturbing, such as wearing a vial of blood around her neck, she found it to be charming. I would go over to her house on occasion, and she would provide me with cherry spritzes as a thankful gesture towards me for coming over. One day, when I was over, I had had one too many, and while washing my hands, I accidentally cut myself on one of her loose razor blades that she had left out on the bathroom counter. Ouch! I yelled as I ran to her, asking for a band-aid. Why do you have razor blades on the counter? I'm sorry. I forgot it was there. I think that they're fascinating, and I use them for thinning my hair. I can kiss it to make it better, she offered. No thanks, I said with a disgusted face. I'd rather just have a band-aid. Suit yourself, she said as she skipped into the bathroom and fumbled through the counters for a bandage. She grabbed my hand, and I felt weirdly immobile as I let her pinch my finger. I watched the blood ooze out as she collected it in the vial that she wore around her neck. She cut her own finger and did the same with her own blood and smiled as she put the cap back on. There, we're blood sisters now, and now no matter what happens, neither of us will ever forget the other. I passed out soon after. I could scarcely remember the events from the day. While I slept, I had the strangest dream. I dreamt that I woke, unsure of my surroundings, to the sound of an owl hooting. I could see a small amount of light from the hall peeking out from under the door frame. I got up to turn off the light and saw a figure in a cloak walking down the stairs at the end of the hall. Young and naive as I was, I thought that I was invincible, so I let my curiosity guide me as I slowly snuck behind the figure and followed it down the stairs. Down in the living room, the cloaked figure joined a gathering of others dressed in the same robes, closing the circle that they had formed. I knew that I was asleep then because none of the hooded figures paid me any mind as I shifted around them, trying to peer in. In the circle, I could see a body lying still. Help us kill him, they all chanted as they opened the circle for me to enter. Cautiously, I walked through the path. I looked at the faces of those adorned in robes and saw the faces of Savannah and my other friends, each wearing a hooded robe. Kill him, they chanted in unison. Stab him with us. I looked down and recognized the body as another one of our friends. I was stunned by what I was seeing. But I thought, what the hell? It's only a dream. So I stabbed him in the chest. The next day, Savannah woke me up, and she looked worried sick. I asked her of her grievance, and she told me about the guilt that she felt over what we had done. She had collected blood from each of our friends, and mine had been the last. Our blood combined had created a reality where, when we had all been sleeping, what we were doing may have really all been happening. Michael had been found dead with several stab wounds, but there was no evidence that anyone else had been inside of his house. Amongst the tales from Argentina, the one that intrigued Daniela the most was one that she came across while working on her master's thesis in anthropological studies. Her family was from Buenos Aires originally, and she felt called to study their lore as an attempt to connect with her ancestors. Naturally, Daniela knew that most folklore was mostly used for storytelling purposes and that the tales were mostly fictitious, but she also knew that at least some part of it originated from truth. She fantasized about going to her familial home, eating its food, and talking to the natives, all while searching for the truth in the myth. She dreamed of it so often that she eventually manifested her wish and was given an opportunity to go there for research purposes. If anything could make the trip better for her, it was Sam. Sam was one of her fellow researchers, and he had agreed to travel with her. Daniela doubted that Sam knew the legend as well as she did, if he knew anything at all. The origins were on the internet for anyone to find, but one had to speak Spanish in order to truly navigate the story. He confirmed this for her as they sat in the Dallas airport during their layover, mentioning to her that she would have to do all of the translating for him. Satisfied, she kept her knowledge to herself and only gave him the bare minimum amount of information to keep him intrigued. The rumor, she told him, was that if one were to eat the fruit of a particular tree at a certain time of the year, and then to fast for 6 days after consumption, that they would gain some sort of superhuman ability. He was satisfied and intrigued enough by her slight retelling that he did not ask her for any further questions. He assured her that the legend was all hers to research. He wasn't sure that he wanted to gain any superhuman ability, although he did think that gaining one sounded fascinating in theory. They laughed and joked and pondered about what a supernatural ability would do for them in their lives, while debating if they would reveal the power to anyone, or if they would keep it strictly between themselves. By the time that their plane landed in Buenos Aires, Sam and Daniela were both feeling particularly in good spirits about each other, and he even let her know that the point of the trip for him was to spend more time getting to know her. Daniela was pleased that Sam was showing interest in her. She liked Sam enough, but to her, his interest in her was a tool for her to gain immortality. For what she omitted of the rumor was that in order to gain immortality, a woman would have to chew the fruit and smear the mush daily on their sexual organ and have sex with it spread on her so that a child would develop in the womb. Whoever ate the placenta would be granted immortality. Sam and Daniela made the trek through the forest and up the mountains to the site where the tree was supposed to grow. During their trek, they bonded that much more over their mutual love for history and the adrenaline rush from their many missed calls while hiking. Much to both of their surprise, they found the tree and it was bearing fruit. In their excitement, they embraced, allowing their sexual tension that had been growing to allow them to make love where they stood. If the rumors were true, then she was excited that Sam would be the father. If the rumors were not true, then she knew that she was on birth control and that it shouldn't matter. She grabbed enough fruit to perform the ritual and was able to convince a naive Sam that the yellow stickiness was natural for her. 9 months later, she had a friend pose as a doula, and when it came time for delivery, Daniela insisted on being alone and away from Sam. What came out of her room was a beautiful boy that was more beautiful than any other child that either Daniela or Solma had ever seen, which made the whole affair that much more tragic when they found out that the umbilical cord had strangled the newborn to death. Next came the placenta. The placenta filled the room with such a repugnant odor that both of the women had to cover their nose. The placenta was a ghastly green color, and it was covered with boils. Solma begged her not to eat it, but in a manic state perpetuated by the death of the child, she forced the thing into her mouth, desperate to complete the task and to not let the child's death be in vain. Solma cried for Sam, but it was too late. Daniela's body went into a violent fit, and she was dead before she ever made it to the hospital. Sam researched the case of the strange fruit in determination to discover what had happened. After confirming with Salma, he became disheartened and violently ill. He could not believe that he had allowed Daniela to eat of the fruit and that he had not realized what she was doing. His guilt tore at him as he realized his own guilt in Daniela's death until eventually he went mad. Recently retired, Abigail was delighted that she no longer had any reason to speak to anyone. She had a pet cat named Isabel, and Isabel offered all of the companionship that Abigail felt like she would need. Abigail preferred reading to cable, and she would spend most of her days curled up under a blanket on her favorite couch that overlooked the sea with a cup of cocoa in hand. Isabel snuggled against her, and with minimal to no distractions. One day, she went out to check the mail and noticed a rather fanciful letter tucked in amongst the spam. How bizarre, she thought to herself. Who could possibly be writing to me? With her letter opener, she carefully slit the envelope and pulled out its contents. It was an invitation for her to meet at an attorney's office to discuss the will of her uncle, Robert Wynor. Uncle Robert's death was a surprise to her, and him leaving her anything in his will was that much more of a surprise. He, like her, and like many others in their family, were loners. Being a member of the Wynor family was seen as a curse by some, as many of the members were shunned by society. Uncle Robert, like Abigail, would likely have argued that he shunned society instead of the other way around. The next day, Abigail went to the office of the attorney, and her suspicions of what she had been made to inherit were made true. To her, through Robert's death, she had been gifted the Wynor Manor. The Wynor Manor had been in the family for many generations, and becoming the new proprietor was an honor amongst the family. Although she adored her home with its simplicity, the estate was desolate, cold, and removed from society, and that felt like a better fit for her. The estate had a reputation for being haunted, but Abigail wasn't worried. She actually preferred it that way. If the locals had a natural tendency to avoid the manor, then that would only make the home that much more appealing for her needs. There would be no visitors, and the people of the town would avoid her that much more due to her association with the estate. So she packed up her stuff, put Isabel into a carrier, and moved in to the manor, feeling only slightly remorseful to leave her previous home behind. When she opened the doors to the manor, a cold draft greeted her, along with a damp, repugnant odor. She hauled her suitcase to the old bedroom that she had stayed in a few times as a child and began to unpack as Isabel walked around, mewing and trying to make sense of her new surroundings. She knew that she would have a lot of work to do in the morning, but her excitement over her new home made it difficult for her to rest. The wind howled, the grandfather clock ticked on, and she could hear the sound of the doors opening and closing from the natural draft in the house. Come on, Brain. Don't get so excited. You can explore the house in the morning. The movers will be here tomorrow, and you have to get some sleep before. Eventually, a restless sleep overtook her, and not long after, her alarm rang, and it was time to get up. The coffee in the house was old and dry, which was exactly what she preferred. Although it did not offer her a caffeine boost, she felt like she was at home. When the movers finally left, she felt relief. This home was finally hers, and no living being would ever enter into her home again. She wandered the property until she came across the family graveyard. She traced her fingers on the inscriptions and felt a strong connection with those that had lived in the estate before her. She felt that much more confident that she would be able to serve the family well as she lived out the rest of her days here. The day quickly turned to evening, and she walked back to the manor. While unpacking more of her stuff, she began to hear chatter and music coming from down the hall. She walked towards it. Although she would have typically been worried, there was something so familiar about the sound that she found herself more curious instead. When she opened the doors to the dining hall, she found the ghostly spirits of her late ancestors floating and chatting around the room. Anyone else might have felt frightened, but Abigail understood what it meant at once. Being the proprietor of the estate meant that she was also the curator for the dead. If anyone could understand a Wynor ghost and their needs, it would be a Wynor themselves. Home, a place that I've known well. I returned to the hunter's loft where I once lived. The grass is overrun, and the place looks desolate, abandoned. How long has it been since someone has lived where I have lived, has slept where I once slept? I pry the door open and wedge myself inside. The air feels moist against my skin, and it takes me back to rainy days in the spring from so long ago. He looks at me in disbelief that I could have ever lived in such a small space. He commented on how it felt cramped and that there was not even a proper door on the bathroom. Retroactively, he seemed to be worried that I had ever lived here, and he marveled at the fact that I ever made it out of here alive. I'll admit, it was a bit inconvenient to live so far away from town, but finding this place, even back then, before the wild grass took over. It was still hard to find. I wanted a space where I could write and where I had no choice but to focus on myself. "Did you find what you were looking for?" he asked as he paced the length of my former home, marveling at its size. "I doubt even half of what you own could have fit in this space." I admitted that it hadn't, that I had all that I needed when I lived here. The place had a certain stillness to it that seemed irrevocable as I gazed at my old home, like a memory waiting on me to enter back into its depths. The space had felt so sacred to me back then, and now, while I watched him pace the length of the room, I couldn't help but feel a sense that it was becoming tainted. This was somewhere that I should have returned to alone. The place wanted me to be alone. Just then, there was a crashing sound as the ceramic fell and shattered on the hardwood floor. Annoyance surged through me in that instant. I was already feeling antsy that he was here with me, and then he broke something. "What the hell did you just do?" I screamed at my boyfriend. "I didn't do shit, Elizabeth. I swear, I was nowhere near it." "Then how did it fall? Did you hit the ledge that it was on while you were doing your incessant pacing, and it just took a while?" I don't know. I doubt it. But even if I did, who cares? This place doesn't look like anyone's lived here in a long time, nor do they care about it at all. It's humid, I feel hot, and I'm ready to go. "Start walking then," I spat at him, because I didn't go through all of this effort to be out here just to leave immediately. This place is precious to me. "Come on, it's not that great. Plus, you don't have to be here to remember the details. You've seen the place. Can we just go? I have a weird feeling all of a sudden." "I already told you that I'm not leaving. Start walking if you want to. I'll pick you up after a while." I watch as he storms out of the house. I'm not sure if he'll come back or not, but for now, I don't care. This place is finally mine again, as it was meant to be. I can feel the energies of the place as they rush through me. Every thought that I ever had while living here, every dream and every desire that I ever had back in 2015 fills me. My heart is beating frantically against my chest as I try to make sense of it all. An overwhelming sensation takes over as I think about how much I have failed during these past 6 years or so, and of all the life that I had missed out on. There's a voice that speaks to me now, telling me that I was a failure, that I should give up if I couldn't do what I set out to do in so many years. Then there was no point for my continued existence. The man I thought that I was going to marry was gone. The people that loved me then all thought of me as a disappointment. I had hurt my friends, and I had done nothing but waste all the years that were presented to me. The voice continued to say cruel things to me as my body writhed in pain upon the hardwood floor. My lungs were filling with dust, and I wanted nothing more than to make it stop. "Do you really want it to all end?" the voice snarled in my ear. "Yes, please, I don't want to live," I yelled. "I failed. I'm a failure. You're right. You're right. You're right." "Let me take over," the voice said. "I can rewind the clock. I can take your body from you, your thoughts, your desires, your dreams, and your fears. I can make all of them come true. All you have to do is let me become you. Let me inside, denounce your life, and let me have it. Become the observer as I make you better. You don't have to do anything. Let me give you all that you have ever desired. I can feel my bones digging at my skin as he speaks, begging to be let free. My body is sweating, and I feel as if I can't breathe. All thoughts of my failure fill my mind, and all I want is to be set free. What's the point of living? The voice asks me. Let me take it from you. Your body seems ready for me to own it and to control it. The cabinet doors violently open and close. The wind howls around me. I can see objects falling and shattering all around me, and I know that it's my fault. This place was condemned because of my negative energy. The voice was right. I didn't deserve my body. I had done nothing to make my life, my reality, or my dreams come true. You can take it, I say as my body jerks uncontrollably. Make my life better. Give me everything that I dreamed of and make it true. I could hear maniacal laughter as the world went still and black. I woke in the same place where I had been, not remembering anything that had just happened. The room was moist, and it had been destroyed. I tried to take in my surroundings, but my head is pounding against my skull, making it harder for me to concentrate. I don't remember passing out, and a man that I scarcely recognize seems to be worried. He has my hand in his hand, and he's holding it tight. I smile weakly at him, but something seems wrong. I had been here with someone else, hadn't I? The man I was with had fair hair, but this man's hair was dark. I tried to put the pieces together, but I could feel nothing at all. I wanted to understand, but nothing made sense. I could hear a growling coming from the shadows of the room, and it felt as if it was the only thing that my brain could focus on. When I got up to go check on it, the man who was holding my hand told me to lie back down. He thinks that I might have had a concussion and that the medical team would be coming soon to check on me. My eyes were drooping. I wanted to go back to sleep, but the man with the dark hair told me to try to stay awake. Where am I? What happened? I asked him. I don't know, he said. I came back to visit the place where we once lived and where we fell in love. And suddenly you fell to the floor. Your body went into a spasm, and it looked as if you may have been being possessed. I've called a priest to check on you. He should be here soon, too. A priest? Why did you call a priest? Darling, I'm worried about you, and I thought that that would comfort you. Darling? I thought to myself. Who is he, and what did he mean? I began yelling for my boyfriend, but this man held me down. "There's no one we know by that name," he said. "It will be all right. We'll get you fixed up soon so you can return back to your parents. I'm sure that our kids are wondering where we've been." I still wasn't sure what he was saying. Nothing about this seemed correct. When the doctors came and I was rushed to the hospital and the tests were ran, there was nothing that anyone could find that was wrong with me apart from the sudden onset of amnesia. A whole 5 years passed this way, and I felt as if something had been taken away from me. I felt empty. Years passed, and my mental state grew worse instead of better. I felt like some part of me was missing, and that my life was incomplete. I didn't love my husband, as I discovered the dark-haired man to be, and I did not know our children at all, nor could I find it in me to love them. They seemed scared of me, as if they knew that I was not their mother. Each night, when I fell asleep, I could hear a whisper of someone saying, "This is what you asked for. There is no turning back." The memory of my son standing in front of my husband sat vividly in my head this morning. When the police came to investigate his death, there had been no indicator that any one person was responsible for the incident. They said that it was a heart attack, and I tried to believe them. And even though it worked for a while, each time that I reflect back to that scene, the same suspicion of my son's involvement haunts me. Andrew had always been a troubled boy. Even with all of the love and understanding that I had for him as a mother, I could only defend the strangeness in his actions to a certain extent. Each time that I got called to a parent-teacher conference, I was always worried, if not even a little bit hopeful, that someone would see the same side of him that I saw, and that they would recommend for him to see a school psychiatrist or at least some other type of specialist. That way, when I told him, the news wouldn't be coming from me. But no, all of his teachers said that he was a bright student that participated well in class, and that he had several friends that he associated with on a normal basis. And they all even said that Andrew was perfectly normal in every single way. Even going so far as to mention that they wished even more kids could be like him because he was an ideal student, mentioning that I should be so proud as a mother, which I suppose was fine, I guess. It's not as if Andrew did anything outright that raised my suspicions. For the life of me, I could not pinpoint why my own son made me feel so nervous, and yet he did. Andrew had always been polite towards his stepfather, but he never really went out of his way to bond with him. I didn't take it as an offense, nor did Harry at first. But after a year passed, I couldn't help but begin getting angry over it. Didn't I have a right to be happy and for my son to accept that Harry made me happy? My other friends who had remarried, either after a divorce or their husbands' deaths, told me that Harry's response was only natural. They told me that Andrew's indifference would be much more preferable to them than their own children's reaction of hating the new man in their life. I agreed with them to an extent, but still, I could not help feeling hurt. During the months preceding my husband's death, Andrew's attitude towards Harry seemed to shift, and initially I was delighted. The two of them began spending a lot of time together, and Harry would always compliment me on raising such an inquisitive, intelligent boy. The two seemed to bond over everything, and they even began working with each other on woodworking projects and creating unique culinary recipes in the kitchen. I had never seen Andrew take such an interest in anything of the sorts before, and I should have been happy because of it. But the whole act made me feel more tense than I had before. I wondered a lot during that time if I had somehow grown envious that the two men in my life were becoming close. But that notion seemed ridiculous when stated out loud to my friends. Again, my friends assured me that I should be delighted that the two were getting along, especially since that was all that I had wanted and had been complaining to them about. And of course, I knew that they were right. The two getting along had been what I wanted, but something about the situation just didn't feel quite right. I started going mad with the thought that part of me might hate my own son. There was just something about him that seemed to unnerve me to my very core. I began doubting that I was feeling jealousy, but instead a hatred for ever getting married to Harry and putting him in harm's way. The thought was not grounded in anything concrete, yet when I tried to shake it from my thoughts, it seemed to plant itself further into my brain. Could there really be a part of me that hated my own son? I started seeing a psychologist who told me that my perceived issue with my son was likely in connection with my own feelings of guilt and sense of feeling wronged by Andrew's dad. The issue with trauma therapy, however, is that it gets worse before it gets better. Each time that I saw Andrew, I could feel my sense of unease around him growing stronger. I began yelling at him and pushing him harder than before. He was a good kid, and I hated myself after, but I just could not shake that feeling that Andrew was somehow disturbed. I tried to believe that Andrew had not killed Harry when I saw him staring at his body sprawled out on the kitchen floor. Anyone would have been in shock if they had found a body. It's not weird that he was hovering, especially considering how close the two of them had become over the past few months. Andrew became very quiet, quieter than usual, after Harry's death, and he refused to really speak at all. He wasn't rude, and it was hard to find a concrete reason to suspect him of anything. Yet, I could still not shake the thought that Harry's death had been purposeful, and that it was my brilliant, kind, charismatic kid's fault. 1 week passed like this, and I felt as if I was truly going mad. Andrew was still a minor, and he was still lived at home. I knew that I needed to support him, but all I could see when I looked at him was a murderer. And as the person who had taken my Harry away from me. One day, flies, hundreds of them, began to swarm all at once in the house, breaking the otherwise calm and quiet afternoon. I couldn't help but to view this as a biblical plague, warning me of some great evil lurking in the house. I held my breath and tried to clear my head of its anxieties, but the swarming only made it worse. I tried to call out for Andrew to help me get rid of the flies, but he did not respond. I searched frantically for a fly swatter as more and more flies continued to swarm around me. The whole room seemed to be going black around me as I listened to the incessant buzzing of the flies. Where had they even come from? We had just had an inspection 3 weeks ago. I spent most of the afternoon trying to kill the flies alone without much reprieve. When I opened the door to Andrew's room to yell at him for not helping me, I could see that there was a giant swarm huddled around a mass in the center of the room. I went over towards it and found Andrew's body being picked over by flies. It was hard to tell through the sea of black, but it looked as if he had been stabbed many times over. I cried as I desperately tried to fight the grisly swarm and eventually was able to find my way to my boy. My precious, sweet, charismatic, intelligent boy who still had my fabric scissors sticking out from his neck. When we were young, our parents brought us to the YMCA camp. Children, ever filled with imagination, would pass stories from one person to the next until we all whispered the same names and feared the same ghost. For me, the story of the dog man from the insane asylum was the big bad. He was the most realistic, and I hated that he preyed on one's sense of security. The dog man was a reminder that no matter how safe you thought that you were, a single mislock could end you. My sister Ellen, on the other hand, was much braver than I was growing up, and she had a certain level of disrespect when it came to the rules. She watched scary movies to put herself to sleep, and instead of being scared of the boogeyman, she got a certain thrill out of terrorizing other kids with her stories. I remember one time at the Y summer camp, she killed the lights in the girls' bathroom while we were all changing into our swimwear. Have any of y'all ever heard of the story of Bloody Mary? She asked us all. A few people murmured no, and the ones who said yes seemed absolutely terrified at the name. Ellen felt encouraged by the response, and she told the story to them in her chilly, raspy voice. At the end, her voice crescendoed into a triumphant glee. And if anyone says her name 3 times in the mirror, she will appear, bloody with stains of her past victims, ready to take her next. The girls screamed and begged her to turn the lights back on, which of course she ignored. Who wants to try it? She can't take all of us. Some girl, I forget her name, began chanting Bloody Mary as we all started running towards the door, not wanting to be anywhere nearby just in case Bloody Mary was summoned through her call. Ellen tried to stop us, but a counselor came into the bathroom just in time and flipped the lights back on. Years later, Ellen would retell the tale and mock me for being afraid of some ghost story. She dared me to try it multiple times throughout her childhood, and she would laugh hysterically when I'd say no. She knew that asking me made me mad, and her constant insistence on us playing Bloody Mary made me that much more afraid of ghosts, making it so that I had to sleep with a nightlight even though I was a teen and no longer a child. Ellen grew silent and more distant as the years went by. She complained each time that I would stand up for myself against her, and she hated that my friends and boyfriends always took my attention away from her. "You're just not the same anymore," she would say in disgust. Ellen began looking for other forms of entertainment when she realized that I was no longer there for her. She snuck out of the house at night and was often caught by her parents and eventually the police. I didn't want to say it, but I thought that she had an addiction for thrill seeking for attention. I felt bad that I wasn't there for her as often, but I had my own friends, and the more rebellious and strange that Ellen became, the less I wanted to be associated with her. I wasn't sure why she thought that she needed to try dangerous stunts, but every year she seemed to get a little bit worse than the year before, until eventually our parents gave up on her and sent her to a corrections home for her drug abuse. None of us heard from her after that. We weren't sure if she blamed us for how her life had played out, but as a family, we all thought that we had done what was best for her. That was until the police contacted us to report that she had died. We had been told initially that she had died from a heart attack that caused her to fall from the rooftop where she had been hanging out with friends. Reluctantly, we had accepted this answer, but the real shock for us came from a witness report. The witness stated that Ellen looked terrified moments before she began to fall. She seemed to be looking at some invisible force that no one else could see, and she trembled and stated the name Mary over and over and over again. There was no one associated with Ellen named Mary at the party, nor was there anyone in her life with that name. The police concluded that she had been talking about marijuana, but no part of me believed this, and I alone carried the burden of truth about her obsession over Bloody Mary.